Hey, Kath. It's really nice to be here with you. We have shared many years and many miles of doing holistic healthcare and birthing, and it's an honor to be here to hear your stories that you'd like to share. So start by telling me, why you wanted to do this project of talking about your births and pregnancies.
Well, I want to show what I learned with each one about the child, about myself, and how it carried me into the world in a little different way than before the birth. Conscious birthing, some people would call it. Mm-hmm. It gave me a lot of information, my 4 children, about life, and I'm a completely different person, having grown in this way. Mm-hmm. I have given birth to 4 beautiful children, and this is directed really to their children, to my grandchildren, and to my daughter's partners and my daughters.
Yeah, lovely. So you've had the 4 pregnancies. What was going on in your life, your world, at the time when you conceived, grew babies, and delivered them?
I literally had my first pregnancy when I was still in my family practice training down in Fort Worth, Texas, in my final couple of months. But that pregnancy was very short, and it took me a couple of years before it happened again. So when I became pregnant with Nuralima, Greg and I were living in upstate New York on about 100 acres of land, a Sufi community. Had maybe 10 families at the time, and in little, very rustic cabins. And there was a large farmhouse where we would do seminars. And I was called that last year of my family practice residency by one of the Sufi teachers who'd helped start it, saying, would you like to come and start a birthing center in this community? Because they often did births on women from the land, but wanted to do it for women in the community. And because I had this little space between my first pregnancy and when I got pregnant with Nuralima, from 28 to 31, it gave me time to work on that. I also, at that time, had sat on a bale of hay that had been in somebody's barn for a couple of years that they'd given to us for our garden, and I was bitten by a poisonous spider. And right before I conceived, I was bitten by this poisonous spider, a brown recluse. And there's really no medical treatment for that other than plastic surgery to cover the hole where it eats out part of the skin. But there was a young family physician there who had studied homeopathy, and she helped me with healing that, so you couldn't tell today where that bite happened, and there was never any plastic surgery. And then she undertook treatment for myself and for Greg, which is my grandchildren's grandfather. And I could feel immediately that the light was strong in this pregnancy and that this one would stay for the whole time. There was a soothing, calming aspect. I remember feeling so relaxed, sleeping late, which was unlike me, not really having a list of things to do, just kind of chilling a lot of the time. It was very sweet to be able to continue to work as a family physician and also to do a few births, but nothing was taxing me. By this time, the community had ended, and it had been transferred over to Greg and I to continue. And we were undertaking so much in the community, but it was okay to pause it, to knit, to make little baby clothes, and to relish that phase of life. So I really appreciated it. As I got towards the end of that pregnancy, I decided to take a 6-day retreat in the Boston area, and I rode the bus there from upstate New York, near Oneonta, New York, and did that with Sapphira Linden there in the Boston Sufi Center, which they called Akanka. 6 beautiful days where I relaxed enough that the baby came in position, and I really got a full sense of the beauty of this being that I was carrying, because you just bring in so much of the soul when you're on retreat. Sapphira's partner was Paran at the time, and he came and sat with me along with Sapphira at the end and tuned in to what quality was there, and we both agreed that Nur, light, was very strong, and Alim, which is divine knowledge, was also very strong. And I already, I think, knew as a female, we would want to call her as a girl, Rachel for my great aunt, and Elizabeth for Greg's mother, 2 very important women. So when she was born, she was called Rachel Elizabeth for the first few days, but then we moved over to Nuralima, and that's been her name ever since. Doing the bus ride back to Unadilla, she became breech again. And it became apparent that even though we had this beautiful birthing room and we had all the support that we needed, that she was going to be born by cesarean section. That was just what the providers in my area felt comfortable with. And she was a double footling breech, and that's what I felt comfortable with. But I'd been doing births at both the birthing room and also at the hospital, about 10 minutes away, and so I was comfortable with the nursing staff and those physicians. And it was just, my one ask was that they wait until I go into labor. And so that happened on a Saturday evening, as I remember. Maybe a Sunday evening. I think maybe a Sunday evening. About 2, I think, I woke up to go to the bathroom, and I noticed I was leaking fluid, and I wakened Greg, and it became clear at 2:30 we needed to put that call into the hospital and get ourselves over there, because I was having contractions, and you don't want to let it go too long before you have the C-section. So, Greg and I called the hospital and got everything going. He went out and got the animals together. At that time, we had a couple of sheep and a baby sheep that had been born in January of that year, Ezra, I think. It was out, and he had to chase it.
Oh, no.
And I'm sitting in the car, like twiddling my thumbs, having labor contractions and thinking, where did he go? I mean, there's not that many places he could have gone. He eventually came back, and, we got there, and by that time I was 4 centimeters dilated. So they moved quickly along, and, the C-section was done, and she was born, and I was awake for the birth, and then I was put out. We stayed in the hospital for a few days, and Greg very kindly would go home in the morning. He would spend the night, and then he would go home and he'd make me a smoothie. And then he would bring that, and maybe somebody, one of the neighbors or one of my friends had made some bran muffins, and they would bring that along with the smoothie. And that way I had some non-hospital food to eat. And after we'd done this for a few days, they let me go, I think, on my 3rd day, because it appeared I was doing well. And they let Nuralima be in there as much as I wanted her. So that was very sweet. I could nurse her on demand. It's a lot when you have a C-section to feel the healing of that. And at the same time, you're making milk to breastfeed the baby. And it gave me a lot of good insight on what's happening with that for future support of other pregnant birthing women.
Yeah. Wow. So, do you want to continue with each pregnancy now, or do you?
Let me just say that the quality that came through with Nuralima's pregnancy and with the retreat and with the birth and everything, the quality was beauty and light.
Yeah.
And I remember that Greg and I stood by the pond in the backyard, and we offered her in like a Native American poem, may she walk in beauty, beauty above her, beauty below her, beauty behind her, beauty before her, beauty to the side and to the other side. May she be surrounded with beauty. And that's a quality that developed in me at that time too, that things slowed down enough for me to see beauty in a different way and to appreciate it more. And I appreciated that she today, that's a quality that she holds well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I know of Nuralima, that is indeed, she is a bright light and a bright beauty.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Nuralima's become the mother of Liam and Josie. Liam 12 and Josie 9.
And
Married to Kevin. So.
And they're all bright lights too.
Yeah.
And then, so how did life went on? You had an infant. You had your practice. You had the birthing center. And what then?
We added a few more elements just to make life interesting. The couple that had started the community, the woman Surya, was the one that had called me and asked me to come and open the birthing center. She would come periodically and lead retreats, both for individuals and for women who were birth attendants attending births. So all the birth attendants, there were maybe 7 or 8 of us, would go on an individual retreat for a weekend with her, guiding. And at the same time, we also started adding in a Native American medicine man, Joseph Rael, beautiful painted arrow, who would come at times each year and would do vision quests or lead seminars. When he was there, he would do sweat lodges. He built a sweat lodge at the top of our hill behind the house. And he and Surya would sometimes gather, and we'd have a couple of hours or a day where they'd talk about blending the feminine and the Native American with the existing culture. So it was very innovative and really met a need I had for bringing in that sacred feminine. And at the same time, Shahabuddin was Surya's former husband. He was now with Kathrineda. He began coming yearly to do what we call Surat, or nature camps. It's a very mystical form of nature, seeing the signs in nature. It's very beautifully done. And we had one the year before Claire was born. That was 2 days, but that year she was born the end of March. We had a 3-day camp, and we had over 100 people there, coming a lot, strong group from Ithaca, New York, some from Utica, some from farther west, some from the Abode and east. We had a children's camp. We had Sufi dancing. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing. So we were in that period when Claire was being conceived and when she was in utero of so much blooming. We had a really beautiful life there, and it was so beautiful to be pregnant with the second child. I was nervous about trying to do her as a vaginal birth because Nuralima had been a C-section, and they'd done it centrally as a midline, which was what the surgeon there, a country surgeon, was most comfortable with. Just wanted him to be comfortable. I felt I could deal with any scar. Anyway, I did a lot of studies about how to do what they called a VBAC. But when Joseph Rael was there one time, I asked him to work with me, and we worked on that, my anxieties about how would it go. And I found there were some difficulties bonding with Claire in that prenatal period inside the uterus because I was uncertain how that would be. Part of me really wanted to give birth there in our home or in the birthing room, but just in the farmhouse on the community. So when I went into labor, I'd had that healing session with him, and it did really felt like there was movement. I'd also made friends with a woman named Gloria, and she came for Claire's birth, as well as a man who had one time been working with the family practice residency, I think there in Albany. His name was Neil, and I don't know if he was still working with the family practice residency, but he was in practice and felt comfortable being there at birth. He brought his partner, and they stayed in the carriage house next to the main house. And, you know, his partner brought his weaving, and, you know, they took walks. Periodically, Neil would come over and check in on me. And, you know, it kind of wasn't going anywhere. For a whole day, I was in labor. Even before he got there, and when he got there, it was 1.5 centimeters dilated, so not going anywhere fast. But when Gloria got there on Saturday afternoon, this was the Saturday before Easter, I have written down that it was around 5:30. She was working on my spine, and when she worked on my lower spine, I felt this energy just warm, radiate out. And then things started moving, and in a little bit I was 4 centimeters, and at some point in the next couple of hours I asked Neil to rupture the bag of waters, and then I was pushing, and she was born about 2 minutes before midnight. And Gloria was there, and Neil, and my birth attendant friend Benita, and Greg. Neralima had gone to sleep in the next room about 9, and you know, she woke up the next morning and met her sister. But Claire was born, you know, I think by 12:31, most people had gone to their own beds to sleep, and it was just Greg and Claire and I. And I remember going to the bathroom and hearing the peepers around the pond. I felt that was just the most lovely sound. Whenever I hear the peepers, I always think of Claire. And there was just a joyous quality to her birth. There was so much happening in our lives, so much happening in the community. And it was a joy. And I just felt that opening of all of that and some healing. So she's always been a dear one to me for that reason. A couple of days after that Zerat camp, when she was 3 months old, I took her, you know, holding her up. We went down to the mailbox, and it included a letter that said my malpractice insurance was going to be tripled if I wanted to keep on delivering babies, even one baby a year, which I couldn't afford. And so I think it was the end of October, maybe, that I delivered my last baby. It was like the 15th or 18th, but I didn't do any more after that, which was sad in a way. I enjoyed that part of my life. But I felt at that point with 2 children, it was important that I be covered by the malpractice insurance. Clearly, people were, you know, feeling the need to feel that coverage, so they had a way in which to seek help if something went wrong. So both Neralima and Claire were cared for people in our local community. Neralima had Jody, and when Jody, as a lay midwife, went to California for 10 weeks and was going to be gone, we were able to find another woman who was currently living in Australia, visiting in Ithaca, but originally from Lithuania. Ayesha came and was able to fill in. And then when Jody came back after 10 weeks, you know, Ayesha was in the carriage house and Jody was up in the hill, in that little house on the top of the hill. They both stayed and they kind of spelled each other, and they, you know, so we had lovely child care for Nuralima. That was wonderful. Claire had a lovely woman, but very quiet, from our local community named Elizabeth. And her mother still credits us with having her be there to take care of Claire and the homeopathic treatment of her, of helping her flower out and become a mother and have 3 boys of her own. So that was a very happy story. But the letter that saying that I had to close the birthing center took us through that when Claire was a year old, and a few months we moved to Shelburne Falls. So joy was the keynote for Claire. Joy and a sense of accomplishment and fullness. And she's married to David, and she has Ava now and Leah. And there's a lot of joy in both those girls, too.
And she's very accomplished.
And Claire's very accomplished, as are all of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When I got to Shelburne Falls, my nutritionist friend Terry had already moved there, I think a year or so, maybe even 2 years, maybe about a year and a half ahead of me, to be near their Vipassana community in Shelburne. She had lived closer to us in Unadilla, maybe 45 minutes away, and when we would do workshops, she would speak on the nutritional aspect, and we did a wellness newsletter with another friend. So she and I continued to work together. So that's kind of one reason that brought us to Shelburne Falls. We really, I couldn't take a deep breath until I got there. I went to Boston and interviewed. I interviewed another place. None of them felt right until we got out in the country a little bit. And Claire was then cared for when I was working and Greg wasn't available, by a woman down the street, just a few houses down the street. Again, the joy coming through. When Claire was maybe 2.5, maybe 3, I didn't nurse him. I nursed him for 3 years, those first 2. I got pregnant fairly quickly and was carrying it along, and then at about 10 weeks that miscarried. And I thought it might put us off of the every 4-year track. But no, it happened very soon after we were told we could try again. And Christia came in about 12 days before Claire turned 4. Christia, I find, in reading the notes about this, was conceived when we were dealing with chickenpox. From chickenpox, we went to Nuralima having whooping cough, then me having whooping cough while I was pregnant with Christia, to Claire having whooping cough, and finally there was a whoop, and we could tell it was whooping cough. Claire got a very slight pneumonia. Then we moved to me having the worst case of poison ivy I've ever seen in November, from petting the cat who'd been out in the woods, to a very kind of, big flu about 6 weeks before she was born, with fever. I know Claire had it, and I think Nuralima had it too, as well as I. Maybe Greg didn't have it, I don't know. But, there was a lot of sickness. And at the same time, in November of that year, that's when the Berlin Wall came down. And that greatly, you can tell that in the children that are born with Christia's year or after, were just a different, they were different. And they were freer. They were more politically involved. I remember at the age of 10 or 8 or something, she and her friends sitting around my dining room table when I lived in Coleraine, and they were talking about the presidential candidates and the vice presidential candidates. And I looked at Nuralima, who was 8 years older, and her friends, and I never heard these conversations. But this is the way that they changed. And I just found it interesting. I didn't, it wasn't good or bad. It was just what was. And it was like coming out of the clouds almost and being more clear. So Christia had that quality. And I also noticed in myself about this time, maybe because I'd had the miscarriage before, but I was developing compassion in a way that I hadn't earlier. There was a lot of me that had been pretty judgmental before this. That was right, this was wrong, and why wasn't it done this way? And that started to shift in this period. And there was a Buddhist quality to it all. It was very, very interesting to kind of feel that happening. There was nothing about the pregnancy that was odd. It's just that we were in a new place. I felt how lovely it had been at Claire's birth to have people that I knew and the community that I shared. And I had so many dear friends here by then. But, it was a different birthing community, even though it was a very good birthing community. I had anxieties about it. It ended up that Nuralima functioned somewhat at the age of 8 as an assistant to the midwife, who was Penfield, and Greg began functioning as a birth attendant, so he was chanting in a way that I could lean into and be relaxed. And I'd also felt that it'd be nice if my work partner, Christopher, and his wife, Deanie, were there. And Deanie was quite helpful. I remember that. We had, at Christia's birth, we had a person, Sally, for Claire, and Linda for Nuralima. Those were their support people. But clearly Linda didn't have to do too much because Nuralima was kind of functioning as a midwife already. The pregnancy and the birth went well. It was maybe 6 hours. Birthed at home in Shelburne Falls without issue, and she was clearly loved by her older sisters, who eventually just took over and kind of took care of her. But I was allowed to nurse her and hold her during those moments. But they were really good big sisters, and she was an out there in a way, so that my sisters remember that my parents were leaving their Kansas farm at that time, and there was an auctioneer there to sell off farm equipment and stuff. Christia, before the age of 2, like 18 months or so, was over at the barn across the road, and you could hear her louder than the auctioneer. We were at the house. And Greg's father was always quite outgoing and talkative. So in the car, there was never a moment of quiet. Look at this, look at that, look at this. And Christia had that quality, like she took him around when she was just barely walking, and pointed out all the flowers in his backyard. And you couldn't quite hear what she was saying, but she was pointing to him and babbling and then pointing to this one, and he couldn't get a word in edgewise. So it was just interesting. That was Christia as a child. And she was born on St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure that went into what there was. Claire had the light with Claire de Lune. Was one of my favorite pieces. Christia, because she was born on St. Patrick's Day, I hadn't thought about this, but I just felt Christ needed to be in her name. But it was too much, the N with the Christina. And, so we called her Christia, which one of my earlier receptionists had come up with for her child. Her quality is this outgoing and compassion. This quality, if you could have seen her when Nathan was born, who's coming up next. At a young age, we crossed the street with her being like 4, holding her arms out while I'm holding Nathan, and we're walking across the street in Shelburne Falls. She's stopping traffic. She's a take charge type person.
Yes.
All her friends noticed this in a loving, caring way.
Absolutely.
Her children are Clara and Emma. She's married to Julian. She lives in France. And I get to go see him in a few weeks. So
Nice.
So that's the 3 girls. And I think everybody felt we were done. And, these things that you think might happen are sometimes just taken away from you. And life has a different story that it's going to play. And how you meet that, I think, is what you have control over. And I enjoyed the pregnancies with the girls, so filled with light, so few problems other than, just regular childhood things going on. And Nathan's birth and pregnancy was very different. And Nathan's being is very different. So I'm going to let you ask something, let you intervene a little bit while I get my energy ready to go into Nathan.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I imagine having those 3 amazing births and pregnancies and births, and these 3 just delightful feminine little nymphs around you really fulfilled your life in so many ways. And yet then you did have, I know that Nathan wasn't actually planned.
Nope.
And but he clearly wanted to come.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he was welcomed and loved by everyone in the family. But it was a big one.
Yes.
So I think he was conceived when we were in Ithaca for a wedding or shortly thereafter. I don't think that Greg and I were very close at that time. I think it was a very real possibility that we could have separated, but I think we came together for a little bit longer because I was pregnant. I didn't feel the light, so I just felt I was entering menopause. I actually told Jeffrey Goldwasser, the network chiropractor, I must be in early menopause. And he said, well, maybe you need to do a pregnancy test, something like that. And I did, and, it was positive. It felt so different. Came from a different space. Nathan came from a different space, and I still don't have any sense of where that space is, but it was different. When I was pregnant with him, I would have dreams, and I would call out with a voice that I haven't had before or since. It was from an awful, desolate place. And people would sometimes, later would say that he was visiting in the darker parts of the world, and that it didn't affect him like it did me. He was a person who could go anywhere. And so he did. In traversing those realms, it felt like he was surrounded by angels who must have cared for him once he was born. It was like angels came into our life. But going through that pregnancy in the early stages was a desolate place. And Greg and I actually sat and meditated about what to do. And I felt a true bond with Nathan at that point. And but there was troubling aspects about it for Greg, and he was having trouble with it. And I sat at Christmas as I was meditating with God, and I just kind of raised my fist to God, like, it's hard to be pregnant with this child, but I am not going to abandon him. And it seemed like saying it out loud and being present to that feeling. I was then flooded with light, and I was filled with a sense that everything was going to be okay. And I wrote later in a writing class that somehow or other, in saying I wouldn't abandon I wouldn't abandon Nathan, I also wouldn't abandon myself.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a part of my development that needed to happen. Being there for myself, seeing myself, witnessing myself, no matter what the condition. And trusting, I learned to trust. The rest of the pregnancy was healthy. I had maybe a 12-hour GI bug when I was maybe 10 weeks pregnant. That's the only thing I had during that pregnancy. About 8 weeks maybe before he came, Greg and I went on retreat separately at the abode in New Lebanon. And my Sufi guide, Maria Christina, felt like I was carrying a Christ child. She mentioned that to me. Greg, with his guide, was able to finally bond with the baby coming in. So before we had Nathan, I think Greg was ready. Again, we were birthing at home, had a different midwife. This time Penfield was away. This time we had Marina. We had, maybe Marina was there for Nuralima. Maybe Sandy was there for Claire. Maybe who was there for Christia? I have no idea. Maybe that was Marina.
Sally?
Somehow,
Was Sally?
I don't know if Sally came to this one.
I thought...
Sally was there for Christia's birth, because she was Claire's support person. But Lisa Harvey, I think, was there. So we had, again, Sandy Founds was a certified nurse midwife. So we had some, respectable training there. But when Nathan was born, it was a very, very gentle birth. Both his lungs collapsed with his first breath. And the oxygen tank was not really available. And so we called the ambulance right away because he was having so many problems breathing. But his eyes were open. He was trusting. He was dusky. But his heart rate was 100, but he was having trouble breathing. So he and I went in the ambulance. We went to Greenfield, to the hospital there. And I held the oxygen, and he was breathing it. And the whole time we're in the ambulance, I'm talking to him. And I'm telling him, I said, I know you wanted to come, and I'm here with you, and I'm not abandoning you. I'm here with you. And of course, the first thing they do when they assess him is decide he has to go to Bay State to the intensive care nursery in Springfield, and I have to stay in Greenfield because my blood pressure's high and I need a little bit more time to get everything dealt with. So he went in the ambulance. The girls were able to come in and see him before he went. I think Greg was very shaken up. My younger sister, Jeannie, came and stayed for a while. I went the next day and I stayed with him. And, when you're in a newborn intensive care nursery, it was a new one. It was state of the art. There was maybe 30 kids there. on various stages of needing care and attention. Mm-hmm. And through that whole time, he was there for 5 days. Rarely was there any other family members with these children. I just felt it was kind of hard to take. I stayed as long as I could. You couldn't eat with him. You couldn't sleep with him. You couldn't go to the bathroom where he was. You had to take off all your gowning equipment. You know, it has its issues. I was still pretty weak from the birth itself. I stayed in a Ronald McDonald house. Christia came with Greg the next day, and she stayed with us there. Jeannie was there by then, staying with Nuralima and Claire. It was a trying time. We didn't know. His hands were funny. He had a club foot. His other foot wasn't normal. Later, this was called arthrogryposis, multiplex, multiple congenita, was born with it. Arthrogryposis, such a big word, just means abnormal positioning of the joints. He began to get fear in his eyes. He obviously was not an easy blood draw. They'd drawn a lot of tubes of blood. I wasn't with him. This is very hard to take. I didn't know how long it would take me, if I'd ever be able to heal this pain. But I do feel that I did over time. But it was a very big thing to have had this child that I've been communicating with throughout the pregnancy, suddenly have him ripped and taken away. I hope that no one has to go through this in my family again. But Nathan came with the angels, and the angels were always with him, and they always protected him. And some people on this plane, one of his preschool teachers saw the angels around him. His physical therapist down in Connecticut, Stephen, saw the angels. Nathan would constantly be looking up and to the left, whichever way is the left, and looking at the angels. And people would see him in their dreams. It was clear that we were helped beyond just the average nurses and doctors and everybody there. I nursed him normally a couple of times, and then he was given chloral hydrate and went for an MRI of his brain, which was normal, but it took him a few days, like 2 weeks, to wake up from that chloral hydrate, and he never nursed normally again. So we had to feed him with milk that I pumped in a special bottle, and I've shown that to the grandkids in a book of pictures, so they know what I'm talking about. It was just relying on a lot of experts. These were people I didn't even know that there were so many different people to help you. There was a special bottle to feed Nathan. There were special ways in which the community could help. There were special grant monies that you could get that were called nursing home diversionary funds for kids who were being cared for at home but not in a nursing home. He had weak muscles. He was like wilted lettuce that first couple of months. He, about 9 months, started doing the posturing, and then about a year probably began doing the seizures, holding his breath. But we'd already at that point, thank God, been up to Dartmouth and met with Dr. Filiano in the pediatric intensive care unit, who gave us some guidance that there was a metabolic disorder. All of his tests done when he was a newborn were normal. He was clearly not normal, but he didn't have any abnormal bones or anything. Everything was normal. But the metabolism of breaking down the food, and you couldn't give him certain classes of medicines because they would cause his breathing to come so low that you would have to intubate him. And then he couldn't be functional. So I worked with so many wonderful people who helped us develop a plan for his feeds, for how we fed him, and for the vitamins and supplements he would take because they had worked with children who couldn't tolerate any of the seizure medicine, so they'd come up with a plan for those children. It came out when Nathan was maybe 24, 25, that this group of children with this genetic variant couldn't, their seizures were of a different kind. They were on the calcium channel gene rather than the sodium-potassium pathway. And the medicines that worked with other seizures didn't work with these seizures that Nathan had. I'd seen that.
Right.
If he would accidentally be given a medicine, he'd still have seizures, but he couldn't breathe very well. And he had to be watched very carefully. So with Nathan, I just have to say that I grew in faith. I saw his vulnerability. And I saw his strength of his soul and his loving heart. And that is what I think was his gift to the world. Everyone loved him. Sweet little pictures of the girls in the Heath preschool playing with him while he was on his special swing, or loving pictures of Christia laying next to him or telling him stories. Claire, taking him to her first grade class and showing them what cast he had on for his club foot, or being with him in other ways. It was very hard for Nurlima to be with him, and she wouldn't want you to leave, but if you were in another part of the house, she could do it. But Claire and Christia were comfortable with it for some reason. And Nurlima was very good with communicating with him. So even from her room in the back of the house, if he was vocalizing, she would be talking with him. And this was very helpful. He was totally loved. He really loved his father, I have to say. Mm-hmm. And this was very sweet to see that Claire had that quality too, where she really liked Greg's voice, and Nathan did too. And so I think he bonded well. He had this cortical blindness so that he could see better out of the peripheral part of his eye, so he would never look quite at you until when he was about, I would say 11. We started doing these treatments, phosphatidylcholine, down in Philadelphia with a nutritional biochemist, and they gave him new tissue to work from in his cell-to-cell communication. And that allowed him to then look at you directly. And it allowed so many other things to go so much better. But the first one was quite nerve-wracking because I didn't know if he would have a bad reaction to it. So with Nathan, a very great teacher to all of us. He came surrounded by angels. When he died, which was in December 2020, we had very little warning. He'd been in the hospital weeks on end sometimes. This time he came in 30 hours before he died. He had heart failure. He had a barely functioning heart. It was the time of COVID. Fortunately, we couldn't have a big thing, so we had a small thing that was very beautiful. And his soul and his angelic presence just will always be alive to me, and I carry him in my heart. He's a dear, dear, sweet one. Yeah. So why are we given these children? Now I know that he was the oldest one of his genetic variant of about 30 throughout the world at the time. Maybe half of them had already passed, some of them as early as their first year of life. Mm-hmm. I think one can't see life from our perspective. we need to expand it a little bit and look at it from a larger perspective.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I'm doing this video talk with Lauren, I know she understands me, is that we're moving, always moving. We're recreating a new life. We're always recreating that. And each child that comes in is bringing with them a new impulse. And Nathan brought a very big impulse. He was vulnerable. He angelic. He was loving. This is his soul, such a huge soul. By having a body that didn't work so well, it allowed his soul to be as big as it was, huge soul. And his heart so big. And you could say, well, he's not like us. But I think we need to look less at how others are like us, but how they can teach us and what we can learn from them.
Yes.
And Nathan has so much still to share with us.
Mm-hmm.
I grew in faith. I became more vulnerable, more accepting of that which I cannot see and that which I cannot understand, the mystery of life, if you will. Mm-hmm. I learned to accept that it is there. I live in a loving universe. I want to help seed the coming times with positive, loving thoughts of how we can live together and be with one another in a different way. I don't know. I think I've about said my piece here.
Okay. Beautifully, beautifully said.
Yeah. So, these are 5 of my 6 grandchildren. My one was just born on June 19th. Liam, and Josie, Ava and Leah, Clara. May you go forth along with Emma, and may you enjoy this new world.